Welcome to Potty, April 16th, 2026.
Three stories caught my attention today that really showed the messy reality of cybersecurity work. We've got Google breaking data promises, a reality check on what cybersecurity jobs actually look like, and some head-scratching regulatory decisions from the FCC. So, let's start with this headline from Hacker News that's pretty stark. Google broke its promise to me. Now ICE has my data. Now, I don't have the full details on what specific promise was broken or exactly what data we're talking about, but this hits on something I've been warning about for years. When you hand over your data to big tech companies, you're essentially trusting them to keep their word about how that data gets used and who gets access to it. My take is this represents a fundamental problem with data governance at these massive platforms. You know, Google processes billions of data points every day, and they've got complex relationships with government agencies. When someone says their promise was broken, it could be anything from a policy change they didn't communicate clearly to a legal request they couldn't refuse. But here's what really bothers me about this. Users often don't realize how little control they actually have once their data is in these systems. The ICE connection is particularly concerning because immigration enforcement has been increasingly aggressive about digital surveillance. What this headline suggests to me is that somewhere along the line, data that someone thought was protected under Google's privacy policies ended up accessible to federal immigration authorities. That's a massive trust breach, and honestly, it's exactly the kind of scenario privacy advocates have been warning about for years. Now, shifting gears completely, there's this really honest post from the cybersecurity subreddit about career expectations versus reality. Someone wrote about how they thought cybersecurity would be all threat hunting, incident response, and catching attackers in the act. But the reality? You're spending most of your time dealing with technical debt that's been accumulating since before you were in high school. This is so accurate, it hurts. The post explains that it's not because previous people were incompetent, it's because environments grow, priorities shift, and nobody has time to go back and clean up. I love this honesty because it captures what I see in the field constantly. You get into cybersecurity thinking you'll be this digital detective, but instead you're often more like a digital janitor, cleaning up decades of shortcuts and band-aid solutions. What really resonates with me about this is how it highlights the unsexy reality of security work. Yeah, there are exciting incident response moments, but the bulk of making systems secure is unglamorous infrastructure work. You're updating legacy systems, fixing misconfigurations, and trying to document processes that nobody wrote down properly. It's like being an archaeologist, but instead of ancient civilizations, you're excavating someone's PowerShell scripts from 2015. And here's something that caught my eye from the regulatory side. There's a headline about the FCC exempting Netgear from a ban on foreign routers, and apparently they're not explaining why. This is actually pretty significant from a supply chain security perspective. When you have blanket bans on foreign networking equipment, those are usually driven by concerns about backdoors, data exfiltration, or remote access capabilities that could be exploited. So when the FCC carves out an exemption for a specific company like Netgear without explaining their reasoning, that raises some interesting questions. My read is that either Netgear provided some kind of assurance about their supply chain or manufacturing processes, or there's some technical or business reason that makes them different from other foreign router manufacturers. But the lack of transparency here is frustrating because these kinds of decisions affect the entire networking ecosystem. What worries me about opaque regulatory decisions like this is that they can create inconsistent security policies. If Netgear gets a pass but other manufacturers don't, consumers and businesses need to understand what criteria the FCC is actually using. Otherwise, you end up with security theater instead of actual protection. I'd really encourage listeners to dig into this one more and see if the FCC eventually provides more explanation about their reasoning. So that's your cybersecurity reality check for today. We've got broken data promises from big tech, career expectations that don't match the day-to-day grind, and regulatory decisions that need more transparency. The common thread here is that cybersecurity is messier and more political than most people realize. It's not just about the technology, it's about trust, communication, and making hard decisions with incomplete information. Keep your systems updated, read those privacy policies carefully, and remember that most security work happens in the boring spaces between the headlines. I'm Sam, and I'll see you tomorrow with more cybersecurity news that actually matters.